Yeah, hi everybody. I'm so very sorry not to be there with you in person this morning. As Sarah says, it's a combination actually for me of train strikes and things I had to do yesterday, and a child with COVID. Yes, it's that time of year again. Means that I'm here virtually. It's such a shame because I was here at the conference last year and had such a wonderful day. Actually, I remember particularly sitting through a presentation on quantum, and by the end, I really very nearly felt like I understood it. So, so that was clearly a measure of success for me. But anyway, this is, I thought, a good chance to reflect on something slightly differently to some of the talks I've given recently. And of course, we're coming to this conference on the back of many of us spending quite a bit of time together in Belfast recently at the UK Space Conference, which I thought was a really fantastic event. But I think we focused quite a lot on our domestic policy work there. Naturally, it's a chance for the whole UK sector to come together. But what I thought I would do today is reflect a bit on our international stance and how we're developing our policy to make sure that we are sort of baking in that international collaboration into everything that we are doing. Perhaps it's fitting to start off with a quote from Chloe Smith, who was our temporary Secretary of State, and we've had quite a few of them over the last year. But Chloe stood in for current Secretary of State Michelle Donnellan while she was on maternity leave over the summer period. And Chloe co-chaired the first of the newly recreated National Space Councils. And Chloe said after the council in a press release, and I thought this captured quite nicely what we're thinking, that the UK is perfectly placed, whether geographically, economically, or as a product of our world-class skills base, to not only be a European leader, but a global power in space. Now, that is a fantastic ambition to have, but clearly, there's a lot to do in order to realise that. But we're starting from a really, really good place. And just thinking back, we've been at the forefront of space cooperation on a European and a global scale for a really long time. Obviously, many of you will know the history, but we, the US, Russian Federation, opened the Outer Space Treaty for signature in 1967, so that the treaty that sort of sets the global approach to activities in space. And then in 1975, we were a co-founder for ESA, the European Space Agency, with 9 other European countries. And then much more recently, of course, we signed the Artemis Accords among the first group of 8 countries to guide responsible space exploration. So what I'm trying to say is, we have always been at the forefront of establishing the importance of collaboration with the other key players around the world to deliver what we want to achieve in space. And today we're building on that, of course, in areas like space sustainability, Earth observation, climate change, and many of our cutting edge science missions, which I know you'll be talking about here at this conference over the course of the day. And you'll hear from our politicians. It's set out in the National Space Strategy. We have a clear intent to continue to play a leading role in those areas. And in fact, the space strategy said very, very bluntly, we will increase our bilateral and multilateral partnerships with other spacefaring nations to achieve our goals in space. So what that's saying is, there are many things, in fact, most things we can't do alone. So we need to really, really continue to work on this. So a couple of examples where I think we have expanded into potentially sort of new-ish areas, or perhaps, let's say, multilateral fora that we haven't had such a high profile in until recent times. And the first one I wanted to just pick out was the what's called the GEO Summit, the Group on Earth Observation Summit, which took place a little bit earlier this year. I think it was September. And for the first time, we actually managed to get a minister out to the Earth Observation Summit, a DSIT minister, to kind of lead our discussions with old and new partners on Earth observation. And that's a really, really important step forward. And of course, the responsibility for Earth observation has moved only quite recently away from DEFRA, the Environment Department, into DSIT. So it's sat with the rest of space policy in my team. And that was partly because of the discussions around Copernicus, but also just because it makes an awful lot of sense. And at that conference, in case you missed it, we announced that the UK would be the first sponsor of what's called the Global Ecosystem Atlas, which is a biodiversity mapping tool. Have a look at it. It's a really fascinating thing, and delighted that we can be that first sponsor to drive forward that ever important work to look at how we conserve biodiversity. And of course, this comes on the back of the EU's Copernicus deal, which re-establishes the importance of the UK in the European project on Earth observation. And the other area is probably just worth dwelling on, as it's a very live issue this week, is of course COP28. And there are colleagues across government who are at COP28 this week, and Paul Bates has been out there as well. The COP28 has, of course, always had important links with space. We know that space data provides much of the information that we need in order to understand and tackle climate change. But what's different this year is that the Space Pavilion is in the green zone, which is the heart of the setup at COP28, making sure that it is centre stage in the discussions about how we tackle climate change. And that's it. So I think that's an important step forward. And as I said, I'm so pleased that we've got a strong delegation from across government, including members of the Space Agency and Space for Climate, who are hosting a number of events this week on climate action. So those are two areas where we're really trying to push international collaboration. But of course, while in those areas, space is we're trying to use space to drive optimism and hope to tackle some of the global challenges that we've got. Space is also an area where there is very, very fierce international competition, and you'll hear our colleagues from Defence talk a lot about space being a contested area. And so I think as we look at how we're going to foster collaboration and hope, we also have to be realistic that this takes place in what is an increasingly congested and contested zone. Now, we can't really talk about international stance without reflecting on our role in Europe and, of course, ESA, which remains, our work in ESA remains the central pillar of what we do internationally. And on the back of the Copernicus deal being ratified earlier this week, which is fantastic news, there's going to be, I think, a renewed impetus to work closely with European partners. So just on Copernicus, for anyone who perhaps hasn't caught up with where we've got to, we're going to participate in the Copernicus component of the EU space programme from the 1st of January 2024. We've had people in Brussels this week, actually, meeting the Copernicus committee. We've had some good conversations with colleagues in UK space and across the sector about how we help companies, academic institutes, other organisations reforge relationships across all of the entrusted entities in relation to Copernicus, and very, very hopeful that we can rebuild some of that important stake that we had in the programme previously. So from the 1st of January going forward, we hope that there will be full participation in meetings. The expectation is that the sector will be able to bid for the contracts to deliver the technology and the services, and that we will be involved in the discussions about the future shaping of the programme. That's all great news, and it allows us, I think, to have a much more positive relationship with the European Commission than we have had for some time. But it's not all straightforward, I think, when it comes to the EU and ESA, as we saw at the European Space Summit at the start of November, where the DG, Joseph Aschbacher, put a really ambitious resolution on the table, which we supported. And, it wasn't just warm words. We really do believe that where ESA is going is the right place and is important. Some areas that we were talking about there were about the Zero Debris Charter, how to kind of support getting through the launcher crisis, and the future work around ISS and Luna and Mars. So really, really exciting program. And actually, the kind of new way I think that ESA's thinking about international collaboration actually opens up some opportunities for the UK that perhaps we haven't had in recent times. I'm thinking particularly around the future of the launcher programme, where, as we all know, things have been quite difficult for some time. And I was really encouraged by Joseph's remarks at the recent UK Space Conference, which, again, some of you might have heard, when I think he was questioned about, is there a future for the UK in that launch programme? And he said, yes, I see the future of launches in Europe being much more diverse. And he noted that we've already got a few launches in development, which, are looking really promising. And, that's fantastic to hear, because we are keen to develop our own launch sector. And, supporting them by providing opportunities in Europe is another important way to do that. However, having said all of that, there is clearly, that tension between ESA and the EU. We're really clear, and we've said this before and we'll continue to say this, that the role of ESA isn't compromised. We see clear roles for ESA and, of course, clear roles for the EU. And where ESA is concerned, it's really important that the approach ESA takes is inclusive to all ESA member states. There shouldn't be a two-tier system within ESA. And we will continue, excuse me, to emphasise that message in the conversations that we have at ESA Council and in other fora. The UK wants to continue to be play a strong role in ESA, but we do need to make sure that all member states are given equal opportunities. And then, of course, as well as continue to build on that strength of our relationship with ESA, we've got a lot in the pipeline bilaterally. And actually, again, really recently, there was a good example of how we're starting to develop really strong bilateral relationships with European partners. So, for example, the UK joined the Atlantic Constellation. We're providing 3 million to Open Cosmos, and that was founded by Spain and Portugal to focus on Earth observation. So that is a great development, working with 2 European partners on a particular project to do something that is important to all of us. And then, so a bit further afield, of course, we'll continue to focus on our relationship with the United States. It's always going to be a critical relationship for us. The Atlantic Declaration was signed earlier in the year by the Prime Minister and President Biden. And that shows, I think, a really positive evolution of our relationship, both commercially in space, but also politically as well. And again, just referring back, it's worth having a look at this. But the areas that we have highlighted that we want to work on, and this is a kind of a multifaceted declaration. So it's about UK Space Agency, NASA collaboration, but it's also kind of broader government collaboration. And we talked about space sustainability, talking about regulatory cooperation, and nuclear power and propulsion. So kind of plenty of things for us to work on there, and that's going to continue to be an important axis for us. And then the UK Space Agency have, of course, got their own bilateral fund, which shows, that they are open to working with other partners on a number of different issues. I think, from what I've heard from talking to colleagues at UKSA, that has been an extraordinarily popular offering out to the community, and they're getting lots and lots of take up. So we really want to see more opportunities like that, where there are particular projects where we can form a relationship, perhaps with a new partner or even an old partner, around an area that is of national priority to both of us. And of course, that doesn't just provide important capabilities for both countries, it also ensures kind of deep collaborations, it ensures enduring partnerships and areas of political collaboration. So really pleased to see more of that happening. The last area I think I'm going to talk about before we move to some Q&A is the approach that we're taking to the space environment. And it's such a hot topic at the moment that I don't think we can talk about how we work internationally really without talking about sustainability. And our strategy, going back to that, we always try and refer back to that as our sort of set of guiding principles. The strategy committed us to demonstrating global leadership and driving discussions on space safety, security and sustainability. And it speaks for itself really. So much has happened over the last year or so, particularly in this area. We've seen incredible developments like the Astra Carter from His Majesty the King. We had our own space sustainability plan, which was launched a year ago. We're seeing new initiatives springing up all the time. Earlier this week, I was at a session hosted by the Lord Mayor and Astroscale on sustainability. We've got the government regulatory review out at the moment, and the Space Agency's consultation on orbital liabilities as well, which I think is closing this week. So there has been so much happening this year, and actually that's part of the challenge, is sort of bringing it all together, hanging it all together so that it makes a difference. But let's kind of welcome that and say almost you can't have too much activity here, because it is probably going to be the defining challenge for all of us, I would say, over the next couple of decades, as we try and create that balance between wanting to expand and grow in space and offer countries, new countries, the chance to realize the benefits of space, with increasing congestion and it being a contested space. And finding the way through that is I think going to be really, really difficult, and it creates opportunity for new relationships as we talk to countries that have similar goals and similar principles to us. It also has the potential to create quite significant tensions. But I hope that we can use our own space capabilities as a sort of diplomatic offering in order to kind of build those relationships that we need to create the right kind of behaviours in space. So our soft power, if you like, which will help deliver a more sustainable space environment for the future. And I shouldn't kind of talk about this really without mentioning the work of the colleagues in FCDO and MOD on the security of the space domain. Because as I said much earlier in this talk, we can only really deliver our goals in space if we can operate in a secure environment. And so I was so pleased that we had a UK-sponsored resolution, which was adopted by the UN General Assembly, to create a working group addressing the threats in space and aiming to put in place responsible space behaviours, so that we all can continue to do the things in space that are so important to achieve. So a big shout out to our colleagues from other parts of government who are leading that work. So finally, I think where are we going to go to next in 2024? It's always good at the end of a year to think back over what's happened and then look ahead to what's coming up next year. So I'll just pick out a couple of quick areas, so we've got time for a few questions. And I think going back into Copernicus is the first one, I'd say. It's a big opportunity, but we've got to get it right. And I recognise that we've got to continue to offer the sector support in order to regain lost ground where we possibly can. There's going to be a couple of big pieces of work, I hope, that we'll be completing in government. I know we've talked about these. I think I actually signalled probably even a year ago that they were coming, and they've taken a little while, but it is important to get them right. One of which is our space sector plan, which is about how government wants to work with the sector to build one of the most attractive, innovative space economies in the world. So that, again, that line from the space strategy. And we're also going to progress the work on the capabilities goals as part of that. And the other big piece that we're starting on, which is relevant as we're talking about international collaboration, is a longer term ESA strategy. So, you know, we've worked with ESA for a really long time. We had a really successful outcome from the last ministerial. But given that ESA is reflecting itself on where it's going, and given that the dynamics with the EU are changing all the time, we need to do our own thinking, our own sort of long-term piece about where we see our role in ESA going over the longer term and where we want to put our emphasis. So this is not about should we be in ESA or should we not be in ESA. You know, let's be clear about that. This is about how we get the most out of being in ESA. So that work, I hope, will be kicking off really soon. And then the other area, of course, is just to continue what we're doing on sustainability. We are hopeful that the work of ESI will provide those first standards for us to look at this year, and the regulatory review will complete sort of late springtime to provide us with some options around whether there are things that we need to change within government to create a really fantastic environment for business here and to attract further inward investment. And we hope to provide a model that other countries might like to look at as they are looking to tackle the same challenge as us. So it's certainly going to be a really busy year again. I hope that's been a slightly sort of helpful reflection on what we're thinking about, how we approach our work internationally. Really happy to take any questions or comments from the floor if we've got a bit of time, Sarah, but I'll close there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. It always astonishes me how much is actually going on in the UK space sector at the moment. And that was a very full briefing of exactly what's going on. So thank you very much. I'm sure there are questions. If you have questions from the floor, can you please wait until a microphone comes to you, especially so that Rebecca can actually hear the question. And is it you? Fantastic questions online. Right. So we will start with the first question online. Rebecca, thank you for your talk. Like you, I can't make it in person today. It's good to see the Space Agency and DSIT represented at COP28. Can I ask what work is going on to minimise the carbon footprint and wider environmental impact, such as from the rapidly growing number of satellites burning up in the upper atmosphere of the space sector?
Thank you very much for the question. Absolutely, you know, as a government department and as part of government that's committed to net zero, we have to do our bit to understand what the carbon impact is from the space sector. We did actually start a bit of work internally last year to try and scope out how we would begin to assess this across the sector. Unfortunately, we had to pause it to respond to a couple of other priorities, but that work is getting underway at the moment because, you know, I think it's not kind of widely understood what the collective impact is of what we do in space. I think there's an argument that people often make, which is we use space to help tackle climate change, and that is of course true, and therefore, you know, there are many benefits to activities in space, but that should not be an excuse for not looking at what those wider impacts might be. So we are picking that up internally. I do think it is a little bit of a gap in our knowledge, but it's a recognised gap, and it's something that we are, as I say, picking up and starting to address now.
Thank you. Is there a question from the floor? Yes.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Sorry for coughing, everybody. Rebecca, could you elaborate a little bit on the international collaborations around space domain awareness, looking up and tracking what is what and where is where, because it is part of the issue of space debris and back and forth. And the way I see it, it's a tangled web, but it does all need joining up in some sort of space traffic control. And I know it's been talked about, but it'd be interesting in your views.
Yes. So that there's already a lot of collaboration. Defence colleagues collaborate extensively, of course, through the CSPO network already in this area. I think what we need to do is look at opportunities for collaborating on the information sharing of the many commercial offerings that are out there. We are doing some work on our capabilities goals to set out exactly this. So I would say watch this space over the next few months, and I hope that our capability goals around space domain awareness, I'm giving you a clue that there will be something in there on space domain awareness, will start to set out how we think we might achieve that knowledge that, of course, we need, as you rightly point out, in order to understand what's going on in the space environment. So again, collaboration has to be at the heart of that. There are many informal conversations going on around it, with key partners that you'd expect, whether that's, the United States, whether that's with European partners, as I said, defence colleagues having a long and extensive history of doing this, but joining it up into something that looks cohesive, comprehensive, is something we're looking at through the capability goals. So more to come on that in the next few months.